This is going a little bit quick now, but it's just so game over for this domain. So I mean, we can play around for ages here. You can see it takes a little bit of time because it needs to create the profile here in Windows. But we have a welcome, and hopefully we will see a desktop pretty soon as well. So with this, we also, I mean, obviously with domain admin, we escalate our privileges on clients and everything, right? You can go ahead now, start CMD. We don't even need to start it as admin because we are essentially domain admin here, net user, mighty/domain, part of the domain admins. Yeah, so today we're actually gonna do pretty much a full-scale simulated penetration test. And I'm gonna go to the desktop and my Pentest folder, which I have some files in. We have the cherry tree documentation here. We have something called Mimikatz. We're gonna have a look at that a little bit later. We have some enumeration script, PSExec for possible lateral movement later, and the PS logged on, right? So this is kind of some of the tools I like to carry around when I do a pen test. So we're going to start Mimikatz, and this is how it looks. Looks awesome, right? No graphical stuff or anything. It's just text. So we just ran who are my groups here on the domain controller with our golden ticket injected, and we are now built-in administrators. We have a lot of other things as well, but we are also domain admin on Michael. We are a group policy creator owner. We are schema admins here, enterprise admins, and this denied RODC path-through replication group, right? High mandatory level. We have access to everything.
Just for everyone watching, this is a simulated environment. It's a lab. It's not a real environment. Never hack networks that you don't own or have permission to attack. So Remi, that's what we're doing here, right? It's just a lab that you guys have created.
Correct. This is a lab that I created myself. So it's running locally. So whenever I need permission to attack something, I just ask myself, hey, can I attack this? And yeah, sure, we can. So we have no limitations here today, which is always fun, right?
Hey everyone, it's David Bumble back with a very special guest. Remi, welcome.
Thank you.
So Remi, you got to tell us a bit about yourself. I'm really excited about this video. Who are you firstly, and what are we going to be covering? I'm really looking forward to this.
So my name is Remi. I've been working in OffSec now for, well, I don't know, 7 years almost. I started back in 2016. My background before OffSec was mainly sysadministration. I've been working in help desk. I've been doing a lot of stuff with technology, right? My whole life has been technology, essentially. So when I started in OffSec, I started as a student administrator. I worked as that for about 2 years. So I was helping a lot of students with mostly the Pen 200 course.
Yep.
I believe it was called Pen Testing with Kali, or PWK back then, right? Had a lot of fun with that and went into some lead positions, some technical management, etc. And then eventually COVID hit, right? So we couldn't do live trainings anymore. OffSec has been doing live trainings for a long time. And we created this virtual program that allowed us to do live trainings online, right? So I was a part of that and did demos and had a lot of fun with students. And I also did some live trainings in real person on the Pen 200 course. A lot of fun as well, meeting some students live. That's cool, and not only be on the camera.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. And now I work as a content developer in OffSec, and I've been a part of the Pen 200 2023 upgrade that we released a couple of months ago. And I also have experience in pen testing, right? I got my hands a little bit dirty somewhere last year to do some engagements here and there, and try to learn some new things that we can incorporate into our courses, right?
So for everyone who's watching, there's a lot of content covered in this video. So I've put timestamps below. As always, use the timestamps if you're only interested in certain parts. Remi's doing an amazing demo, but there's also theoretical parts to the video where he explains certain things. Because if you don't have that understanding, it's difficult to follow along. But just use the timestamps to jump. So what I'm really excited about is we talking about hacking Windows, right? And this is similar content to what's in the course, right?
Yeah. So today we're actually going to do pretty much a full-scale simulated penetration test. It's based on the Pen 200 content. It's not the exact same attack vectors or anything like that, but it's on the same level, right? We're going to focus mainly on Windows and especially Active Directory because we're going to pen test a domain, right? So we're going to get a little bit of everything. We're going to do some enumeration, file transfers. We're going to do some Windows privilege escalation, for example, which is kind of a tricky concept for some of our students, right? And we're going to mainly focus on Active Directory, and we're going to do some devastating attacks to the organization we are simulating here. So that's going to be fun.
Offline, you were talking about a golden ticket or something, and that sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so yeah, we're going to do a golden ticket here, and we're going to do it as nasty as possible.
That is just nasty.
Essentially, we're going to gain some persistence in this domain that we're pen testing, hopefully, if everything goes right. And yeah, it's hopefully it's going to be devastating. And I'm glad this is a simulated pen test and not a real one, right? Because that would be not too good. So...
So I've got some great news as well. OffSec have given me a discount. Remi, what kind of discount are we giving people for? Is it for the 200 course?
It's actually for a product we call Learn One.
Okay.
So it's potentially for a lot of courses, right? So the Learn One is essentially a product you can buy, which will give you a whole year of access to a specific course of your choosing. Is very flexible to the learner. Not really any time crunch there. I mean, you have a year to do the course. And it's also going to give you access to prerequisites, such as if you want to do the Pen 200 course, you're also going to get access to the Pen 100 material, right? So you don't necessarily need to know pen testing whatsoever to get into this. And it's also 2 exam attempts there. We do want our learners to be certified, and we are continuously adding content. So you will get access to most of that as well. So yeah.
So it's a 10% discount, right?
Yeah, it's a 10% discount, yeah.
So for everyone watching, use the link below if you want to get 10% off. Big thanks to OffSec for sharing that. I don't get any affiliate fees. I don't get any money. So just disclaimer, this is just to hopefully help you. I get nothing in exchange for this video. But Remi, we've spoken enough. Let's start with the demo.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to start our simulated penetration test here right now. And as you can see, I'm sharing my screen. We are logged into Kali Linux, which is the distro I like to use when I'm doing penetration tests. The demo today is going to be a mix between technical and not so technical. I'm going to try to explain in a detailed way what we're doing, but having a little bit of experience with Windows especially, and have a high-level overview of what Active Directory is going to be a plus for this one, because we're going to do a pen test on a domain, right?
Are you running that in VirtualBox or in VMware or something? You said it's running locally, right?
Yeah, so this is running locally on my computer now. Currently, I'm using Hyper-V in Windows.
Great.
So the whole environment we're going to pen test today is actually running in Hyper-V. So it's a virtual machine, yeah. So that gives me the ability to really mess my Kali up and just revert it, right? That happens
exactly.
a little bit too often. So
yeah, what I think is nice though is, I mean, what you're demonstrating is this whole infrastructure running on, is it on a laptop and people can replicate it?
Yeah, this is on a pretty fully spec'd laptop. Yeah, it's we're gonna see how many machines we are running in a couple here when we go into the enumeration. Currently, I think it's running like 7 machines plus the host itself, so it's taking up a lot of resources. But yeah, it works pretty well, and you don't necessarily need 6 machines or anything like that to build this yourself either. To get started with Active Directory, especially, you need a server and a client. You need a domain controller and just a normal client, and off you go, right?
How much RAM you got on that laptop?
32 gigs, I believe. If it's not 64, I don't even remember now. Based on how well it runs now, I actually think it's 64.
Yeah, so you need a decent amount of RAM, but it's amazing what you can do. But again, I keep distracting you. Go for it, man.
As I mentioned before, we are running a lot of VMs. You don't necessarily need to run that many VMs to get into this, right?
Yeah.
So, but we wanted to set up a cool scenario, and I think we did, right? So we're going to dive into the demo, and today we are not really going to focus too much on the enumeration perspective of the penetration test, because that can eventually get a little bit dull to watch. We're going to focus mostly on attacks. Yeah, the attacks are always funny, right?
Enumeration is where you just discover what's out there. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Actually, I have to say that my favorite part when it comes to penetration testing is, in fact, in information gathering. Believe it or not, I really, really enjoy it, because you kind of get to be this detective, right? Okay, I need to pull all of this together, and we can do certain stuff with it. But of course, attacks, that's really the cool part, right? So today we're going to focus on Active Directory, as I mentioned before. We're going to find out what to do when we have some credentials. The goal for the penetration test today is going to be to obtain domain admin in this domain I have running locally here. We are going to take somewhat a targeted approach here, because if we're going to do all the enumeration and everything you do in a normal pen test, we will probably be sitting here for a week or 2 weeks, right? A pen test might even last for months. So we need to condense this a little bit. So it's going to be it's going to feel a little bit more targeted, but it's still going to be the same attack vectors as you can find in the real world, right? I have some really simple documentation written up here. This is just used in Cherry Tree in Kali. I wrote it up for this demonstration, and we're going to do a penetration test, a simulated one. I just want to highlight that again on a corp.com domain. This is the same domain name you will see in the Pen 200 labs if you take the Pen 200 course, but it's not the same domain, right? This is running locally on my end, and I have been engineering some cool attack vectors that we're going to use specifically for this demonstration. We're going to start in something that we call an assumed breach. And assumed breach can be a lot of things, right? In many penetration tests, when you start, you go to the client, and the client may give you a laptop and possible a username and a password as well that allows you to log into their system, and they will hire you to do this internal penetration test, right? And this is known as a gray box penetration test. They give you some sort of access. They obviously they don't give you the password for the domain admin or anything like that. That's up to you to find as a pen tester. But that's really an assumed breach. Now, in the demo we're going to do today, we actually take this a little bit step further, and I would say that we are towards the latter parts of the penetration test today. So in this assumed breach, we can say that we have compromised a user in the corp domain with a username Michael, as you can see on my screen here. We have his password as well, so we can log into the domain with this user. And just for show, we can say that the attack vector we used there was social engineering, right? We tricked Michael here into giving us his username and password. Or maybe we found it on some paper he wrote it down on. It could literally be everything, right? But the main part here is that it's an assumed breach.
But this is not a powerful user, right? It's just like a normal user.
This user is pretty standard, yeah.
Okay.
It has no admin privileges nowhere in the domain.
And Cherry Tree is just like some kind of logging software, or what is it?
Yeah, so this is a kind of you can use it for documentation. It's the reason I use it in Kali now is because it's installed by default. But I like to keep my notes there. I also use tools such as Obsidian, for example, or OneNote. I have also been kind of a sucker for Notepad, which can become a little bit tricky from time to time. You just dump everything you find into Notepad, right? And eventually, especially when you pen test a large organization, you're going to get a lot of information as well, right? So you want to find a tool that works for you. But I like to be able to, like in here, for example, I have added nodes. So we have computer, users and groups and sessions and that kind of stuff. So in this case, I'm just gonna go through what I personally like to start with when I'm in an engagement where I'm gonna enumerate a domain, right? I'm not saying this is the correct way. I'm not saying this is what you have to do whatsoever. You can do what you want. As a pen tester, it's important to find a methodology that works for you, right? There is no right or wrong answer here. In this case, we have enumerated the machines in the domain, and we can see we have a total of 6 machines. So the domain is it's not huge. The first machine there is a domain controller, absolutely central piece of the domain that is very important. We have a file server, web server, we have a management server, and we have 2 clients. In the middle there, I have resolved the IP addresses from their host name in case we want to do some scanning with Nmap, for example, from Kali. In case we are not able to resolve DNS here, then we can target them with a direct IP address. Maybe we will have to do that eventually. I don't know. We'll see. And we also have 4 Windows Server 2022 machines here. So 4 servers, 2 clients, and the clients are running Windows 11.
I'm glad to see you using like latest version of software, not some old thing.
Yeah. So when you enumerate computers in the domain, you might actually end up finding really, really old artifacts that were created or built when the dinosaurs were still walking the earth, right? They might still be logged into the domain. And obviously, if you find such an artifact, that kind of sails up to be a possible attack vector, right? Looking at this, I don't necessarily see any interesting attack vectors just yet, because this is all updated. Those machines actually have the latest patches and everything. So we are probably looking for possible misconfigurations in this domain, right? That's the computers. We can go to users and groups as well. As I mentioned, it's a very small domain. We have the users here, a total of, I think, 7. 3 of those are default. The 3 you see on top here. We have the built-in administrator for the domain, the most powerful account. And if we are able to get access to this one during our pen test, we can do, really cool stuff. Not very realistic maybe to get access to this particular account, but who knows? I've seen many weird things out there doing penetration tests. So we have a guest account. We don't necessarily care about that one for now, but we have an interesting here. This is also a default account, KRBTGT. And this is a very important account in the domain that is used during the Kerberos authentication process. It's used to sign TGT tickets. I'm talking a little bit more technical here now, right? But the KRBTGT account is very important for the authentication mechanism, and we're going to have a look more specifically at what this account is doing eventually. Whatever you do as a sysadmin, make sure that no attackers get access to this account, because at that point it's just game over. Like literally, it's game over. So we're hopefully gonna see that game over eventually today, right? Okay, so we also have 4 non-default users in the domain here. We have Michael, Mary, Emma, and Jeff.
My name is Jeff.
We have access to Michael. This is our starting point today, and we'll see if we can get access to the rest as well at some point, right? A little bit further down here, I did some really light group enumeration, and those are not all the groups in AD, by the way. This is just 4 of them, just a really partial view, but I found them a little bit interesting, right? The reason here is Enterprise Admin is the most powerful group in the Active Directory, and we can see that the administrator account is a member here, and this is default. I'm going to get to why this group is such a powerful one in a couple of seconds here, right? Looking at domain admins, we see something interesting. Jeff.
My name is Jeff.
Is a member there. So just by looking at this, our goal is to get domain admin in the domain. Jeff is a member of the domain admins group. So if we at some point are able to get access to Jeff, we would essentially be domain admin if we can impersonate him or log in as Jeff. That would literally just be kind of game over for the domain and the end of our engagement, right? The reason I said that enterprise admins is more powerful is that in a domain, right, or in Active Directory, you might have one domain or you might have several domains, right?
Yep.
So in this case, corp.com, we can refer to corp.com as kind of the root domain, right? And in this case, it's really the only domain. We don't have any other domains here. So we don't necessarily care too much about whether we get access to this group or the domain admins group. But if you have more domains, let's say, for example, you have a subdomain called sales.corp.com, and you have another subdomain called development.corp.com, for example, right? So you have 3 domains. You have the root domain and the 2 subdomains. Then the enterprise admin will have full access to all the domains, including the subdomains, right? So that's really powerful. If you get access to, let's say, for example, domain admin in sales.corp.com, that does not necessarily mean that you are a domain admin in development.corp.com as well, or the root domain. So there is a domain admins for each domain, but there is one enterprise admins for the whole forest, essentially, which gives you access to everything.
In the PWK course, do you teach a bit of the theory of this stuff?
Yeah,
okay,
we do.
Great.
We are mostly focusing on the domain admins there because we don't want to overcomplicate too much here. I just wanted to explain the difference here right now, right? But the goal in PWK is mostly to get domain admin, but you essentially follow kind of the same methodology if you target enterprise admins, for example, right? It's going to be the same thing. But if you are in a multi-domain, forest, you need to keep this in mind.
And we discussed already, you've done the hard work of discovering all of this stuff before this video, basically. And now you're just going to show how to leverage that information.
Yeah. So I'm going through this just to give some context to the attacks we're going to do, right? Because otherwise the attacks are just going to be, okay, how did Remi do this?
Exactly.
Why is he doing this? So just a little bit of context.
No, it's great. I mean, I think people would have the question, how did you find this stuff? But we'll cover that in perhaps a different video.
Yeah. Essentially, you have a lot of different tools you can use to enumerate AD. But we can discuss that a little bit later. I'm just presenting the information for now. So we have also 2 non-standard groups here, right? We have something called local ADM FS, which sounds really interesting. And Mary is actually a member of that group, right? If we look at the naming convention here, local ADM most likely has something to do with local admin privileges, right? And looking at the suffix here, FS, this corresponds pretty well with the file server that we have in the domain. So we can do an educated guess now and say that, okay, if we are able to impersonate Mary at some point, we might have local admin access to the file server in the domain. There are many ways, or more enumeration we could do here. We could look at the description for the group, for example. We could enumerate something called group policies, but those are out of scope for Pen 200. So I didn't want to add more, confusion stuff in there right now.
So Remi, a question that people may have is, what's the difference between a local administrator or local admin versus a domain admin, sorry?
So a local admin is an admin on that given machine only, right?
Okay.
So let's, for example, we can go back to our computers here. A domain admin would essentially be also an administrator on all those machines, right?
Yeah.
So you can log in here with your domain admin account. I really, really don't recommend doing that, by the way. Never do that. Just don't.
Now I want to log in as root and administrator.
Yeah, we're going to see why that's a bad idea later, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, a domain admin has access to pretty much everything in the domain, but a local admin may have access to, like, for example, client 01 here. If I add the user Mary to the local administrators group on this particular machine only, on client 01, then Mary is only going to be a local admin on that particular machine. She's not going to be a local admin on management or Web02, right? We're actually going to see a little bit more clear difference between a domain login and a local login when we start the attacks today. So hopefully that's going to make a lot more sense then. The last group here, RDP Web, Michael is a member there. And taking an educated guess here, we can probably say that Michael should be able to log in via RDP to the web server, right? And again, we can do more enumeration on this, but this seems to be, the Michael user seems to be rather interesting after all, right? Lastly, in the enumeration, we have a tiny bit here. We ran PS logged on the servers, and we found on Web02 here, which is a domain server, that Corp Mary is actually logged in. Based on our enumeration, Mary should be a local administrator on the files02, right? Enumerating computers, users and groups and sessions usually are an eye-opener for what you can potentially do, right? And I wrote up this highly theoretical, by the way. We need to prove if this is going to work or not. I have an attack path here. So the goal now is to start with Michael. We're going to try to RDP into Web02 as Michael. If we are successful in doing that, that would actually count as a lateral movement attack in the domain. It doesn't have to be some super fancy, the PS exec or evil WinRM or that kind of stuff to do lateral movement. If RDP is open and you can use it, boom, lateral movement, right?
Lateral movement is just where you're moving from one machine to another, right?
Essentially, yeah. You obtain credentials and you just move around like a madman where you can, right? Yeah. You want to get access to as much as possible, essentially. So my plan here, if we are admin, we don't know that yet, right? If Michael is an admin on Web02, we're going to try to steal the credentials from Mary, which is logged in on Web02, right? If we are not local admin, we will have to escalate our privileges. After escalating the privileges, we can try to steal Mary's credentials again, because in order to steal those credentials, we need a local, it doesn't necessarily need to be a local admin. We need to be an administrator, or we need to be system on the machine, because we need to tap into a specific process in order to steal those credentials, right? So we may have to do some escalation here. With Mary, if the stars align and everything is fine, we should be able to access files02 as local administrator, and then who knows what happens, right? We cannot possibly tell right now, and I wish I could see into the future, but I can't. So I don't know if any of this is going to work, but this is a highly theoretical attack path now, and something I kind of cooked up in my head just based on the information we have gathered.
But I love that. You've given us sort of like, you've logged the details of what you've discovered, and then you've come up with an attack path, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So that's it for the enumeration part for now, right? We just went through, some documentation, and now it's time to finally do some hacking, right? So I'm going to minimize my cherry tree here now, and I'm going to open a terminal in Kali. And I have some long commands today, which I have documented.
So for everyone watching, I put the commands below to a GitHub link where you can, just copy the commands. So don't worry about trying to copy them while you're watching the video. So Remi, thanks so much for sharing the commands, and it'll obviously make the video quicker. So again, use the link below. Sorry, Remi, to interrupt. Carry on.
No problem at all. No problem. I also need to do some explanation here on what we're actually doing in order to connect to this machine, right? So we're using a built-in tool, RDP client called X3RDP in this case, which is installed in Kali. You don't necessarily need to use this. You can use your own personal preference, like, our desktop. There are so many clients out there, but you should be able to connect with most of them, right? So what's more important here is that we are using the username Michael, which we found this password and username, right? So username Michael, the password is my elite password, is a very, very nice password, right?
Yeah.
So Michael is probably very elite here. And
that's his downfall, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to prove him wrong, right?
Yeah.
So the main important part here is the /dcorp.com. This kind of goes a little bit back to where we talked about local admin versus domain admin and that kind of stuff. Because Michael, he probably does not have a local user account on the machine we're connecting to. This is the IP for Web02, by the way. So if we don't specify the domain here, Michael will not be able to log in. We need to specify the domain name. The rest here, this is just me doing some fonting and resizing to make this look good. So this is not necessarily something you need to connect via RDP to a machine. Those parts are the most important ones, and we're going to use those many times today. So let me go ahead and click or hit enter here, and hopefully we will be authenticated somewhere, and it seems that we are. All right, so we're logged into this Windows machine, right? And I don't necessarily like graphical user interfaces too much, so I'm going to go ahead and just start command prompt here as a true hacker, right?
I was going to say, what is this? What's a GUI? Come on.
Yeah, what is it? Like, who knows, right? We are in command prompt now, and we can start looking at some commands, right? We can type hostname, for example. This shows that we are indeed logged in on the machine Web02. So we are logged in on Web02 here. And who are we? Who am I, right? Simple commands. We are Michael. So we can see that here. What's important to note is that we have this prefix here called corp. This tells us that we are connected to the corp.com domain. We are not logged in locally on a Web02 machine. If it said Web02 here, we would be a local account on the machine, but we're not. We are in the domain, right?
And so what this is the lateral movement thing where you were able to jump from one machine to another and log in with this user, which, someone fished his details or we found it online or something, right?
Yeah, so once I actually did RDP here, that would count as a lateral movement technique in Active Directory because we are not connecting to the laptop we were given to the client anymore. We are connecting somewhere else with some credentials we found. And anytime you move from one machine to the other, it kind of counts as a lateral movement.
And for all the haters that might say, well, this is dumb because it's too easy, but this is the stuff that happens, right? People's credentials are leaked.
This happens, trust me. And I'm going to have to agree that this was a really simple attack right now, but we are going to get more complex down the line, right? So we start light and we end, I'm not going to say nightmare, but it's going to be a little bit more tricky. We're not just going to RDP.
It's like what Jeremy said in the last interview. It just gets better and better, right? So
yeah. That's the goal here, right? Okay, so yeah, as a recap, we are logged in on Web02 as Michael. I'm doing a lot of CLS, by the way, just to clear my screen. So like this. And just to show the user accounts on the local machine, if I do net user, for example, we can see that there is no Michael user here. And this further illustrates that we are not logged in with a local account. This administrator account is the local administrator for the Web02 machine. This is not the same administrator account as the domain admin, right? There are many administrators in this network. And who knows? Maybe this one is interesting for us. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see, right? I know that there can be a little bit of confusion about, okay, am I local or am I in a domain, right? The best way to figure it out, who am I? And you will see the domain here. If you see the host name for the machine, you are logged in locally. So clearing the screen again. And our goal now, if you go back to the cherry tree documentation and look at the attack paths, we have RDP'd into Web02. If you're admin, we're going to try to steal Mary's credentials because she is also logged in on this machine, right? If not, we will have to escalate. So far on this point, our theory proves true, right? We were able to RDP. That's good. And let's see what we can do more here. Now, I'm going to do who am I /groups here. So I typed who am I groups here in the command prompt because I want to learn a little bit more about this Michael user, right? And this will give me an overview over local groups on the machine that I'm a member of and also the domain groups. So in this case, we see that we are a part of everyone. That makes sense, right? Because we are a user actually on the machine now. We are a part of the built-in users. We are remote desktop users. The ones you see here are pretty standard, right? Nothing really special about those permissions. And we can see that on the right side there as well, well-known group, right? We also have corp /RDP web. We already knew that. This is an AD group. In this case, we actually see the security identifier for the domain itself and the relative ID for this group, which is 1607. Now, this may not make a lot of sense right now, but this security identifier is going to play a crucial role eventually when we're going to be a little bit more devastating to the organization, right? But looking at this, we do not have any reference to administrator or anything. So it really seems like we are not a local admin on this machine based on this, because then it would probably say built-in administrators here, right? We can potentially try to start command prompt as administrator, but we are getting a UAC prompt here, which asks us for credentials. And if we were logged in with a local admin here, we would essentially just have to click yes or no on this prompt. In this case, we need to enter credentials, and this tells me, okay, very likely we are not a local admin on the machine. Looking back at our attack path, we wanted to steal Mary's hash, right? That's kind of our goal here, but we cannot do that unless we are local admin on the machine. In this case, we need to do something called privilege escalation. And that's essentially you go from one user and you elevate your privileges on the machine, right? And that can often be a little bit tricky, both for Linux and Windows. It's not necessarily my favorite field of expertise either, but as a pen tester, you just simply have to do it from time to time. That's just the way it is. Often in a pen test as well, when you're handed this laptop, you're most likely a low privileged user there. And one of the goals from the client might be to escalate the privileges. Can you escalate our laptops? We need to look into some ways to escalate our privileges here. And for the last couple of years, there's been more automation when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? Back in the days when I started as a hacker, we essentially had to write our own scripts to enumerate this and that. Like, okay, I want to enumerate all the users. I want to enumerate services, and you kind of type a script to do that for you and output, the details, right? Nowadays, we have tools such as WinPiece, for example. It's a really, really great tool that will essentially go through the machine, check for permissions on different folders, check for anomalies, right, in Windows, and point you towards, okay, hey, this might be something worth checking a little bit closer.
You get that from GitHub or somewhere?
Yeah, you can find it on GitHub. You also can find pre-built executables for it, so WinPiece exe. Be careful, though. You want to make sure that you're downloading the correct file.
Exactly.
Just be careful in general when you work in this kind of field. Yeah. Never trust anyone, right? So, but yeah, WinPiece is a great tool. It's going to iterate through everything on the machine for you and kind of point out the anomalies. I'm more of the manual guy when it comes to this kind of stuff. And while I like automated tools, I also like to know how to do stuff myself, right? Yeah. I don't want to put all my trust in this. Okay, I'm going to run this tool and hope that it's going to give me something. And if it doesn't, I'm going to just deem that, okay, this system is secure, right? I just don't want to go down that path. As I mentioned in the beginning here, we are doing a simulated test, and I'm not going to enumerate the entire Windows system here now because that's just going to take too much time. But if you are like me, you like to do things manually, you might browse through the file system, look at, okay, how many users has a profile here, what kind of applications are installed, right? If there is a vulnerable service, for example, you might be able to find an exploit for it and just boom, you can exploit it and possibly elevate your privileges at the same time. So in this case, we're gonna do this manually, and this is gonna be somewhat targeted, right? I'm gonna start PowerShell on the Web2 machine, and I'm going to run a rather long command here. In this case, we are running something called get sim instance. And sim stands for Common Information Model. For enumeration purposes, I would really compare this to WMI, which is the Windows Management Instrumentation. But sim is going to provide you with cross-platform capability, and it also has some enhanced remote capabilities for sysadmins and that kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of the new hot thing to use. We don't necessarily need to use it, but I'm trying to stay at least a little bit up to date on the new tools we are using, right? So in this case, we are going to use getNetSim or getSim instance on the Win32 service, which is a WMI class that provides information about services on the machine. We're going to ask for the name. So we pipe this into select, right? We're going to select the name. We want to see the state of the service, whether it's running or disabled and that kind of stuff. The path name, which is the the path to where the executable for the service is, what executable is being executed when the service starts, right? And the start name, who actually starts the service, because this plays a vital role if we want to escalate our privileges. In this case, we pipe all of this into where object, where the state is going to be like running, because first we're going to enumerate the running services. And yes, we should probably enumerate disabled services, stopped services, and that kind of stuff as well, because we might be able to use those for something evil as well. Evil! But let's start with running. We need to start somewhere, right, yep. David? So let's hit enter and be amazed on the output we receive here. This can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you're new to Windows privilege escalation, right? We received a lot of information here, and by default, there is a lot of services running in Windows as well, and many of those are default. Yeah, it's actually rather insane. Now, I want to give an example right away on why exactly I'm doing this. Okay, why is Remi looking at the services? What's his goal here, right? Just as an example, we can look at the spooler service here, right? The name is spooler. We can see that the running executable for this one is spool.sv.exe. So when a spooler service starts, it's going to run this executable here, right? This is the path for the executable for the service. Looking at the right side, this one is being started as local system. I'm not saying the spooler service is vulnerable here, right? But if we are able to replace this exe file with some malicious code, and that exe file is being executed by local system, what's going to happen, right? We're actually going to have command execution as local system on the machine, and local system is the highest privilege you can have on a Windows machine, right? Let's say if we are able to replace this one with, for example, a reverse shell that connects back to us in a listener we have in Kali, we're going to get a system shell, and we have full control over the box, right? So that's the goal here. Looking for weak permissions, essentially. So looking at the output here, we have a lot of services, but we can see that many of those are pointing to C:\Windows System 32. Here we have SVC host exe, for example. We have a lot of default services here, and we don't necessarily want to try to replace SVC host exe, right? And we are essentially looking for anomalies here. I like to stay away from whatever where I see C:\Windows System 32. And as I mentioned before, we need to start somewhere. So let's look for some anomalies here, right? Browsing up a little bit, we actually have one here. It can be a little bit tricky to see, but we have a MySQL service running here called XAMPP. Well, actually, the service is called MySQL, right? But we can see the executable for it. This is not the standard service in Windows. XAMPP is something some sysadmin has installed on the machine at some point. And this is kind of sailing up to be one of those interesting ones, right? Especially if you look on the right side here, because this service is also running with local system. So again, if we are able to replace this exe file with malicious code, it's going to execute as local system, and we can do a whole lot of stuff, right? So this one is interesting. Going a little bit further up here, on the top, we can see Apache 2.4 is also running, and we can see the path executable, which is also XAMPP. So in this case, it seems like the sysadmin installed XAMPP on the machine, using it to serve some sort of web application with a MySQL database on the backend, right? And this one is also running as local system. Now, the goal for us, we don't know if this is going to work yet, by the way, but the goal is essentially to replace this exe file. But in order to do that, we need to have the correct permissions, right? And we need to find out those permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to clear the screen. And I'm going to use a tool which is called, I'm not sure if I pronounce this correctly, but I call it ICACLS. This stands for Integrity Access Control Access List. It's a very fancy word, right? For something that does something fairly simple. It's installed in Windows by default, and it can essentially be used to, well, the technical correct term would be to enumerate the access control list on a binary or a folder, right? We can use this to enumerate binaries and folders, the permissions there, and we're going to point this to, I copied the folder earlier, but I think I might remember it. It's gone from my clipboard now. But XAMPP, Apache, bin, Apache, no, HTTPD exe was it, right? HTTPD, like this. So we can point this tool to this particular file and see the permissions.
So that was a good point. For the previous tool, is that also built into Windows, or did you have to install something to run that?
No, that's built. That's built into PowerShell. The getSim instance is a PowerShell command.
Great. So you haven't installed any malicious software yet. It's just using the built-in tools at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are living off the land, as we like to call it.
Yeah.
So running the tool here, we are now specifying an HTTP DEXE file, and we can see the first occurrence of a user here, right? NT authority system. We can see an I here. This simply means that the permission that NT authority system has is being inherited from the parent folder here, right? So this is probably the same permission on bin, Apache, XAMPP, and the C drive itself, because the NT authority system is the most privileged account. And we can see the F here. That means full access. And it's the same for administrators. No surprise, really, because an admin would be able to do modifications on this file. But if we were a system or admin, we wouldn't even be in this situation, right? Because we wouldn't necessarily have to escalate our privileges. We would be able to achieve our goals. But we are just essentially a built-in user here. And the built-in users, they also inherit the permissions from the parent folder. But in this case, we have no full access. We have R, which means read permissions, and X means executable permissions, right? So we are not able to replace this exe file with the permissions we have here. We can launch the file, but what is that going to do, right?
Yeah.
Start the web server. I mean, it doesn't really, it won't help us. So we need to look a little bit further. I'm going to run the same on the SQL and XAMPP. Let's see, MySQL bin, MySQL D file as well, like this. And here we kind of see something really interesting right away. The built-in users, which we are a part of, has this F, right? So we have full access there. It's actually listed twice here because the sysadmin did something really strange here.
Strange or dumb?
Dumb.
Yeah.
And also a little bit strange. I will have to arrest myself here because I set this up, right?
Of course.
But we can blame Jeff, the domain admin.
My name is Jeff.
In the system here. So we have two occurrences here. We have two built-in users. They both have the F, so they have full access. The I on this one means that it's inheriting permissions from the parent folders, right? This one just means that we have full access to this particular file. So this tells me that the sysadmin has actually logged into this machine, first given full access to, well, I don't know what's first, right? But they might have given full access to the MySQL DEXE file to the built-in users, and then afterwards given full access to the whole structure, right? I mean, I don't know, but there are two things going on there. And of course, we have the NT authority system and the administrators. They still have full access, right? And to further like set this a little bit in stone, we can do the who am I groups again, right? And looking at this as a whole now, we are running who am I as Michael. We are a part of the built-in users. And looking here, we have full access to this MySQL DEXE file. And we can actually replace the file if we want to.
It's crazy that you as a standard user can get all this information, right?
It is. It's actually a little bit scary what normal users can get. Also with AD enumeration, there are so many things you can query the domain controller for via LDAP as long as you are just connected to the domain. It's kind of mind-blowing. In this case, I mean, I've said many times now, we're going to replace this file, but in an engagement, even though this Web02 server is within the scope, I don't think it would be a good idea to just go ahead and replace the MySQL file, right? Because the service is eventually going to crash. If we try to restart the service and it's going to start with a malicious exe file, the MySQL service is not going to be available anymore, right? This might be a critical piece of component or a critical component rather for the organization, right? If they lose access to their database, we may cause some mayhem. Before you do this in a penetration test, if you're a serious penetration tester, you will contact the client. You will lay down this scenario. Okay, this is what we can do. What we can see here is actually proof enough that we are able to replace this file. And we don't necessarily have to go ahead and do the attack itself. In order to progress through the pen test a little bit, we might have to do that. But instead of bringing the whole system down, maybe you can work with a client and they can give you the admin access instead of you giving yourself the admin access on a Web02 server yourself by breaking it, right? Because this is a proof that we can actually conduct this attack.
I mean, that whole point is it's a penetration test. You're not hacking. You're trying to help the client. Yeah,
exactly. And you're not really helping the client if you jump on the first vulnerability you find and you just crash the whole system. I mean,
exactly.
that's
not the
not really. Yeah, that's not the goal, right? But as I said, I'm the creator of this lab, and I talked to myself earlier. Hey, Remi, is it okay if I mess it up a little bit? Hell yeah, right?
You got snapshots, so you're good.
I have snapshots, so I can always just revert back. So,
well, Remi, thanks for giving Remi permission to hack Remi's system.
Yeah, no problem, right? So we're going to do this attack. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen now because this is a little bit messy. I'm also going to minimize the RDP window because we're going to go back to Kali now. I'm going to open a new terminal, and let's call the previous terminal Web02 RDP, right? Just to keep it a little bit clean here. And I'm going to go to the desktop and my Pentest folder, which I have some files in. We have the cherry tree documentation here. We have something called Mimikatz. We're going to have a look at that a little bit later. We have some enumeration script, PSExec for possible lateral movement later, and the PS logged on, right? So this is kind of some of the tools I like to carry around when I do a pen test, and I've added it to the Pentest folder now because we may have to download them from the Kali machine later, right? So I'm going to create a C code here and hopefully create an executable that we can use in Windows, right? Now, a lot of your viewers now, David, is probably going to arrest me, but I'm going to use Nano for this.
That's okay.
I don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to understand how to enter text into VI, right? So I'm just going to...
You're going to start a war.
I'm going to start a war now.
Yeah, you are.
But yeah, so arrest me if you want, right? I'm just not capable of using VI. I need to use the Nano here.
So for everyone watching, Remi's in the States, right?
Yeah.
He's in some unknown country, right?
I'm in some unknown country, yeah, for sure. So I'm going to create a file here called adduser.c, which is just going to be a C file, essentially. I'm going to do a copy and paste now with the source code because I don't want to type this out on the fly here. So essentially, this is as simple as it gets, right? We are including a standard library here. We have a main function, right? We are declaring an integer named I, and the variable is used to store the return value of system here, right? So this is you don't need to know a lot of C to understand this. You don't necessarily even need to know C at all. You can copy this, right? We're essentially asking the system here to run net user. This is like if we are on a Windows system as admin, we could type this out in a command prompt, right? So net user Mighty, this is going to be the username. Mighty is my handle on Discord, by the way, if you want if you want to say hello there. And the password. In this case, we have a super weak password in a penetration test. If you're allowed to do this attack, pick a stronger password, right? Be a responsible penetration tester. And we have the /add here. So this command is hopefully, when it's being run a system, as we think it will be, it's going to add the user to the local box Web02 with this password. Then once this is run, we're going to run net local group, and we're going to try to log or add the user Mighty into the administrators group, right? So this is the way you would do it if you were an admin on the box. You would type those commands in order to add another admin. Now, you might notice that I don't have any /domain here. Now, if I, for example, log in as a domain admin and I run the same command, but I do /domain, I'm actually going to add a user to Active Directory. And I could essentially do net group domain admins and add myself there, because you have the power to do that as a domain admin, right? The problem here is that the service, the MySQLD service we talked about, is not running in the domain context. It's running on the local box on Web02. So this is not going to be a domain user, but hopefully it's going to be a local user that is being added to the administrators group, right? Okay, so we're going to save this as adduser.c, right? Like this. And if I do ls adduser.c here now, we can see that we only have adduser.c file, which contains our source code. Now we need to compile this because we need an exe file. And we can do this pretty simple with a cross compiler in Kali, which is installed by default as well. I'm going to use x86 Ming W32 here in GCC. This is often used to compile exploit code, for example, or create, simple Windows executables as we're doing here, right? This is used quite a lot by penetration testers. And the only thing we need to do here is to feed it the source code or the C code we have here and specify an output file. So in this case, the output file, let's go with adduser.exe. And no errors. This is, I'm not a programmer, by the way, and this is almost a record for me because always when I try to compile my own code, it's just a bunch of errors and warnings. Usually I get rid of the errors and I don't really care about the warnings, right? But in this case, it worked. Let's do ls adduser and a wildcard again, and we can see that we have the C file. We can delete that now. We don't need it anymore. But more importantly, we have the adduser exe file. So we need to transfer this over to Windows somehow now, to the Web02 server, right? Now, there are many ways to do this. In one of our courses, we actually have modules on file transfers, right? There are so many ways we could do this. We could set up an FTP server on Kali and kind of tap into that from Windows. We could set up a SMB share. What I personally like to do is to use a web server, because from the Web2 client, we should be able to reach our Kali machine anyway. And if we set up a web server, it's so easy to just download files using PowerShell, for example, right? I'm going to clear the screen, and I never remember my IP address. So I'm going to do ifconfig eth0. And this is the IP address on my Kali attacking machine. And if I set up a web server here now, I should be able to reach it using this IP, right? To set up a web server, we'll use Python 3. We can also use Python 2 for this, but I'm trying to,
Be a good boy.
Yeah, be a good boy. And we're just going to use the HTTP server module, and we're just going to serve this on port 80, right? So like this, now it's currently serving on all interfaces, including ETH0, and we should be able to copy this and go into the Windows machine and get the adduser.exe file. So I'm going to open command prompt again. Hostname, we are still on Web2 as Michael. I'm going to create a file. Well, actually, I'm going to create a folder. So we're going to create a folder called Pentest. If I do ls here now, I need to move into the folder as well. And if I do ls, the folder is empty, right? Now with PowerShell, we can, for example, invoke web request, right? It's a very simple way, IWR, short for invoke web request. We can point to a URI, and we will just type HTTP or IP address for Kali /adduser.exe, because we are currently serving our Pentest folder in Kali, right? The out file, let's just call it adduser.exe for now. Eventually, we need to rename the file to match the service we're going to try to take over, right? But for now, adduser.exe, we do ls, and we do have the file here. So our malicious file is now in place on the Windows machine. The only thing that is left to do now is to simply replace the file, the MySQL file, and try to start the service again. What I like to do, if I'm allowed from the client to do this, I always take a backup of the original file anyway, right? So we're going to go ahead and move the file in MySQL or XAMPP MySQL bin and MySQL d.exe to the current working directory. We can call it backup MySQL d.exe, right? If we do this allows us to replace the file again later with the original one, and the SQL server should start up again, right? What we need to do now, we need to add the adduser.exe to the original location of the MySQL d.exe and restart the service. So in this case, I'm going to do move, and in the current working directory, we have the adduser.exe. We're going to move it to the XAMPP MySQL bin, and this is where we can rename it. We could have renamed it earlier as well, but I just like to do it this way. We need to do it correctly. If you have a typo here, the service is not going to start, right? So that was a typo right away. MySQL d.exe.
Shows that you're human, man.
Yeah. I hope this is correct. It looks correct, right, David? Yep. MySQL d.exe. Okay, cool. So we do this. We didn't get any errors because we are built-in user with full access to this file. So we are able to do this.
Even though the service was running, right?
Yeah, the service is still running. The executable is used to start the service, and the service should probably still work. I mean, it might depend a little bit, but I know that it's going to crash completely when we try to restart it at least, right? Yeah. Let's go ahead and do a net stop MySQL. That's the service name. And, as usual, penetration testing, we have another obstacle here. Access is denied. We can argue that this is something we should have checked beforehand. Are we in fact able to restart the service? And we should have probably checked that, right? I mean, what kind of options do we have? We have Mary that is logged in on the machine. We don't necessarily want to lose Mary here, right?
I was going to say you could reboot, but then you're going to lose it, right?
Yeah. In the real world, you would. Maybe not in Remi's lab, right? We'll see. So we're going to try to simulate this as good as possible. Like in the real world now, you could potentially social engineer someone into logging in and starting the service. That might be a little bit, unrealistic. Or we could social engineer an admin to go in and restart the service. We can say it's crashed or something like that. Maybe we could even contact Mary. Hey, can you do a restart on the machine? And we call Mary. Oh yeah, well, of course, Jeff, I can do a restart here. And I'll just continue my work later, and she's going to log back in again, and we're going to be admin, and everything is just cool, right? So hopefully that's going to be the case here. We'll see. Now I'm going to run another command here. So again, we're running net or get net sim instance, same as before, but in this case, we are targeting the MySQL service itself. And instead of looking at name and stuff like that, we're going to look at the start mode for the service because we want to see, okay, how does this service actually start? And the start mode is automatic. This means that if the server restarts, the service is also going to start running our malicious code. The only option we have in this case would be to restart it ourselves, but we don't even know if we have permissions to restart the server, right? Maybe we need to brute force ourselves into their server room and kind of just knocking out the server and click the button. Who knows? But in this case, I actually found a really cool way to find out whether or not we can restart the server. I found this yesterday, and I have never used this before. We can do restart computer in PowerShell, right? And we can just run this and see, okay, are we able to restart? But if we add what if here, this is pretty cool. So it's not going to run restart computer, but it's going to tell us, okay, what happens if I run this command, right? The what if here is, it's going to perform the operation, which is in quote here, enable the local shutdown access rights and restart the computer on target localhost. Yeah, on target localhost web02, right? So if we run this, it's simply going to restart. Another way of finding out whether we have the option or not is to do whoami/priv, and we can have a look for the SE shutdown privilege here, right? So we can use the shutdown privilege here. It's currently disabled, but this is just because it's not in use right now, right? So the fact that this even shows up in this list tells me that I am able to restart the computer. So let's just do this with PowerShell. Restart computer. Boom. And it's restarting. Now, if we go back to the original tab, we can see that we disconnected from Michael. We're not connected to Web02 anymore, which makes sense because the server went down, right? So now we may have to wait a little bit and while the server restarts, and we could log back into Michael and check if our Mighty user is there, or we can simply just try to log in as Mighty, right? With a username and a password we had. So we can log in with X3RDP again with the user Mighty, with a password to the same machine. But in this case, we are not specifying the corp.com domain, right? Because we don't have a domain user. But hopefully this one is going to be a local admin on the machine.
That was the account that you created with your C program, right?
Correct, yeah. So let's just cross our fingers and hope that this worked. It's highly theoretical. It seems like we're getting something here at least. Let me maximize this. We are getting Windows. We are taken to something called the server manager. And yuck, we don't need this graphical stuff. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start command prompt again. I'm gonna now right-click the command prompt and hope that I can just bypass this USC, right, without credentials. And we can see here, we're not asked for credentials. We can simply type yes, and we should now be in a high integrity label or level on this machine. So we can do who am I, we are Mighty, and this also further illustrates that we are not a part of the domain, right? We are logged in directly on Web02. If I do who am I groups, and this is where it gets interesting, right? Looking at this bad boy right here, we are a part of the built-in administrators. So we just escalated our privileges using a service that was misconfigured by the sysadmin. It had nothing to do with XAMPP really. There is no vulnerability there in that version as far as I can tell, at least for permissions. But the sysadmin did a poor job here, right? Doing this kind of stuff. We escalated our privileges. That's cool. Let's go back to our documentation and the attack path. If we are admin, we're going to try to steal Mary's credentials. Now, in the real world, we rebooted this machine. Mary might not be logged in anymore, but in Remi's lab, she is. She's automatically logging in here for the purposes of the proof of concept we want to show here. But in the real world, now you would probably try to monitor this machine a little bit. And once someone logs in there, you can use your admin user and try to steal their credentials. And now we are kind of slowly going into the Active Directory portion of the call again, right? I'm now going to go ahead and clear the screen. I'm going to go into the C:users directly or directory and the Mighty folder. We have our own profile here now. I'm going to create a new folder called Pentest. So we created a new folder called Pentest. Let's move into it and we do PowerShell. I just like PowerShell so much because I can do Control L and this happens. It's just so fantastic. And it also supports LS, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so used to. So in this folder, we have nothing. And finally, we are going to dive into a little bit of Mimikatz action. Many of the viewers probably heard about Mimikatz before if you're into penetration testing. And this is the tool we're going to use to hopefully do some magic here. I'm going to try to explain as detailed as possible what we're going to do. But the first thing we need to do is to actually download it, right? We have our Pentest folder shared on our Python 3 web server. So do I remember my IP? I actually think I do. That would be rather crazy. So we are serving Mimikatz in the Pentest folder. The out file, we can just call it Mimikatz here as well. Mimikatz.exe, like this. This is a little bit bigger, so it's going to take a little bit more time to download. There we go. If we do lsr, here now, we have Mimikatz.exe on the machine, right? We're going to start, well, actually, we can keep it like this for now. We're going to have to do a little bit of theory before we move on now. We're going to use this tool called Mimikatz, and we're essentially going to tap into a process or the memory of a process called LSAS. This one also has a really complex name, such as ICACLS earlier. It's actually the Local Security Authority Subsystem Service. And dear Lord, what a complex thing. I'm just going to refer to it as LSAS, right? In Active Directory, we have two main authentication methods. We have Kerberos, which is the default, and it was released, I think, in 2000 and has been the default ever since. And we also have something called NTLM Authentication, which is also enabled by default in Active Directory. It can be disabled, but based on my experience in penetration testing and sysadmin, it's just there, right? It just works. And, it works with the older applications, third-party applications, etc. If Kerberos isn't available, for example, NTLM is just going to come in and save the day, right? However, NTLM is rather insecure, right? Now, yeah. I don't necessarily need to dive too deep into the technical details here, and this might just be my opinion, but when you obtain access to an NTLM hash for a user somehow, which we're going to show in a couple here, hopefully, right? You can use that hash to gain access to whatever that user also has access to, right? You don't need their password. You can do something called a pass the hash attack, and that's just such a nasty attack, to be honest. Like, it's really cool as a pen tester once you get access to an NTLM hash and you can use it like that, but it's not really good for security, right? If you want to protect your environment. I would say that's probably one of the most insane, well, not insane, but scary parts with NTLM.
So if you get the hash, you don't need authentication. You can just go straight in, right?
You need to authenticate, but you can just use the hash to authenticate.
Yeah.
You don't need a password anymore. So
like a cookie on a session or something.
Essentially, yeah. And you can set a strong password, like super strong password, but the NTLM hash is still just going to let you in, right? But the password strength doesn't really matter too much if you use that authentication mechanism, right? Kerberos is different, and we have a whole module in Pen 200 that explains this. But essentially, Kerberos evolves around the issuance of tickets and the usage of tickets for authentication purposes, right? We can give a really quick and high-level overview over the two, but the default is Kerberos. So if you use Kerberos, you sit down at your computer, your Windows computer. I mean, it can also be a Linux computer, but we are focusing on Windows here. You log in with your username and your password, right? And you essentially do the same for NTLM as well. You will come in with your credentials in order to authenticate to the domain or other resources in the domain, right?
Yeah.
So you type your password, then the client is going to send something called an authentication server request. And this is going to sound a little bit maybe crazy technical if you haven't heard about Kerberos before. But the authentication server request, ASREC, is being like ASREC for short, right? It's being sent to the KDC, which in most cases runs on a domain controller. And KDC stands for Key Distribution Center. Now, we can call this a package, or let's call it a request, right? We can just call it a request for short. And this request contains a timestamp, which is encrypted using the hash, which is derived from the password of the user logging in. Then the domain controller is going to receive this request. And since the domain controller has access to all the password hashes, it's going to look into its own, okay, where is the password hash for Michael, for example, right? And it's going to try to decrypt the timestamp using the same hash. And if those are matching, authentication is successful, right? At that point, the domain controller is going to reply to the client with something called authentication server reply, or ASREP. And this contains the juicy information we are after. It contains a session key and something called a ticket granting ticket. And the session key is encrypted with the user's password, but the TGT itself is the really interesting part here. This contains information about the user, such as the username, what groups the users has access to, for example. So if you're a domain admin, that's going to be reflected in the TGT. And the TGT is also encrypted using the secret key, which is the NTLM hash for the KRB TGT account I talked about earlier. The very super important account in Active Directory. And the KRB TGT is only known to the KDC, right? After this, the client or the user essentially show the ticket to the KDC whenever it wants access to our resource, right? So let's say, for example, user Michael, he logs into the domain. He wants to RDP to the Web02 machine. Michael's computer is going to send a ticket granting service to the KDC requesting a service ticket. Then the KDC is going to verify, well, it's going to send a request for a TGS, right? The KDC is going to verify the TGT to make sure it's valid. And if it's valid, it's going to send a service ticket back to Michael's computer. And then essentially Michael's computer is going to send this service ticket to the Web02 machine. Web02 is going to decrypt the ticket, verifies the access permissions, and let him log in, right? Right, so that was Kerberos explained, right? I'm going to briefly explain NTLM as well. This is more of a challenge response kind of thing. So when Michael, for example, logs into his client, the client is going to calculate his NTLM hash based on the password. And it's going to be stored in memory on the client, right? The client is then going to send the username to the server where Michael wants to connect. Let's say this is Web02 again, as an example. The server is then going to respond with a challenge. This is just a random value. So the client is going to receive this challenge, and the client is going to encrypt the challenge using the NTLM hash based on Michael's password and send this back, and this is known as a response. Then Web02 going to receive this, and it's going to forward the response itself, the username, as well as the challenge to the domain controller or the DC, right? The DC, as always, has access to everything in the kingdom. It's going to look up the NTLM hash for Michael stored in Active Directory, and it's going to try to encrypt this challenge itself using the stored NTLM hash for Michael, and then compare the challenge it encrypted itself as well as the response it got from Michael. And if those match, DC is going to confirm the authentication, and the server is going to be, granted access. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a background information, Kerberos versus NTLM, and when exactly is NTLM used, right?
Yeah.
I've seen NTLM used in so many enterprises during my penetration testing. It's actually kind of crazy, but it's nothing wrong with it really, but you would probably try to get away from it at some point. But if a user authenticates to an IP address instead of a host name, for example, the NTLM authentication is used. If a user authenticates to a host name which is not registered in an AD integrated DNS server, NTLM is used. Third-party applications often use NTLM as well. It's very easy to set up an NTLM authentication in, for example, a web app, for example. I've been there, done that, right? I'm struggling with that these days, actually, by the way, to get Kerberos running properly. But yeah, we find it a lot. And if you are a sysadmin and you kind of want to get away from NTLM and only use Kerberos, make sure that you plan everything accordingly. Because systems might break, they might not be, compatible with Kerberos, for example, and do it during a maintenance window after careful planning and really mapping out your environment. You just don't want to go someday and, hey, we're just going to disable NTLM and see what happens, right? In my domain, it would probably be fine because I only have 6 machines, but a normal domain is usually a little bit bigger than this, right? So we're now going to go back to our command prompt here. Whether it's tickets or hashes in memory, don't really care too much, because hopefully when we tap into the else as memory under the right circumstances, we will be able to get both tickets and hashes. Hashes are just easier to use, in my opinion, and we're going to focus on hashes for now and get into tickets a little bit later. I mentioned else as. That's a process that functions as a part of the operating system, Windows in this case. And it's a part of the process that maintains and enforces security policies, authentication, and that kind of stuff. And both tickets and NTLM hashes may be stored there. Let's stop with the theory and get back to, the hacking, right? So I'm going to start Mimikatz here. Thank you that, AV didn't get this. Mimikatz you're going to be caught by AV or EDRs if you use this on our normal penetration test. Talk with the client before and see if you can whitelist something, or if you're into it, you can try to bypass AV as well. But that's not really what we are covering here now. We are working in an open field, right? Learning the basics.
In your advanced courses, you cover some of that AV evasion, is that right? Or was it part of the PWK?
No, that's correct. Well, we have a module in Pen 200 as well for AV evasion. And those techniques we show there might actually work in this scenario. We have some really cool techniques there that allows you to bypass Defender, for example, and that kind of stuff. But we are going much deeper into that when we get to Pen 300, for example. And AV evasion can really be tricky, but it's all logic, right? So you just need to kind of sit down with it and learn it, and that's pretty much it. So we're going to start Mimikatz, and this is how it looks. Looks awesome, right? No graphical stuff or anything. It's just text. We can see the developer here. We have the version. This is just a fantastic tool when it comes to pen testing on Active Directory. We also have a reference to something called Pingcastler. I just want to mention this briefly. I actually use Pingcastler quite a lot when I was doing pen testing. It's a really great enumeration tool for Active Directory. You literally download it. You run an exe file, it's going to gather a whole bunch of data for you and present it to you in a report. I mean, it might even find some nice vulnerabilities, and I like the tool. Anyway, we're not focusing on enumeration. We're going to focus on something else. We're going to try to get that Mary hash finally, right? I'm going to type a command here and explain a little bit what it does. We're going to run something called privilege debug, and this is essentially going to enable this SE debug privilege. It's going to allow process we are running in here to access certain level or certain system level resources, right? Essentially, we need to run this to be able to dump LSAS memory and extract hashes. So it's just a command we need to run here. We don't need to know exactly what is going on under the hood. And we can see that the privilege is okay. The only thing we need to do now is to tap into this process and try to get logon passwords. Mary, she is logged in here, and hopefully she has a logon password stored in memory. So to do this, we're going to do secure LSA logon passwords. So we are now essentially tapping into this LSAS process, or LSA, Local Security Authority is the name for that one. And this is going to give us probably a lot of output, right? So let's try. And the terminal goes kind of crazy here. We saw a lot of text fly past our screens, and we have more down here, right? Now, this is dumping every single hash on the machine. For example, the username web02. So this is probably a hash for the machine account in Active Directory for the web02. We don't necessarily care too much about it. We can also see a username DWM1 here, Windows Manager. So this has nothing to do with the corp.com, and we are interested in Mary from corp.com, right? So we will just have to do some scrolling here until we find it. And here we go, actually. We can see here that we have an authentication ID, we have a session, and we have a username, Mary. This is what we're after. We can see the domain as well, corp, and the logon server is DC01. We even have her logon time. And if you look at the logon time compared to the reboot, it seems like she logged in pretty much right away after the reboot. Thank Lord for that, right? We need to trust in some magic from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, in the real world, you would have just waited. But I mean, obviously, a lab, we're speeding things up because otherwise, there's no point waiting around. Yeah,
I would make sure to monitor this machine, the Web02 machine, like crazy all the time to see if anyone logs in there. Because once someone logs in, you might be able to get their NTLM hash, as we're doing here, right? We can see the NTLM here for Mary. This is everything we need to impersonate the user. I'm going to go ahead now and just copy this, and I'm actually going to minimize Windows, and we're going to look at a possible lateral movement technique, right? So we're going to do this from Kali. I'm going to start a new terminal here. I think this might be good. We'll see how the output is going to look like. We're going to use something called WMI-exec, right? With Impacket. This is a tool installed default in Kali. I'm going to show the help syntax for it. I think it's user bin Impacket. Let's see, Impacket, WMI-exec. I think there's a lot of tools there. WMI can be used by sysadmins to remotely manage systems, right? Like the same with SIM, it can be used to do certain things. And in this case, we see the usage here. We have a target. This is important. So we can use domain /username. We can supply a password. We can do @target name or IP address. More importantly, if you look a little bit further down here, it supports hashes, LM hash and NT hash. And we have an NT hash here, right? So we essentially need to use the Impacket WMI-exec. We want to use the hashes authentication. We supply Mary's hash, her username, and the IP we want to connect to, which in this case is going to be file.so2, a new server, right? So let me clear my screen. User bin Impacket WMI-exec hashes. And we are not going to use the LM part. We're going to use the NTLM. And yes, it was on my clipboard. corp/Mary at the IP address. So we need the IP address for file.so2 now. We can go back to our documentation and find it. This is the IP. So let's copy it and just paste it in here. Now, we need to keep our fingers crossed now and hope that this is going to work, because there are some prerequisites for this to work. We need port 135, I believe it is, to be open on the target, which is often the case in a domain environment like this. We also need to be a domain admin. We don't need, obviously not a domain admin. We need to be a local administrator on the machine. And as we have seen, local administrator can be a domain user or a local user, right? And this is also relatively common. And we have been able to compromise Mary, which according to our enumeration is an admin on FileZone2. So let's launch this and see what happens. And we can see that we are indeed getting a prompt here. Now, in this case, we use WMI-exec. We could have used a bunch of other tools as well. We could probably use Metasploit, has some modules that supports hashes. Mimikatz itself, Evil WinRM, and crackmap-exec, and so on. This is just one example, right? If I do a hostname, it's a little bit laggy now, right? But essentially, we see that we are connected to FileZone2. If we do who am I, we are logged in as Mary, but we never use their password, right?
So this is the example of using the hash of the NTLM hash that you captured. Correct. And just bypassing all the authentication.
Yeah, so this is known as pass the hash technique, right? Yeah. And no matter how complex password Mary would have here, we would still be able to log in with her hash, right? So it's kind of scary.
And you use Mimikatz just to grab that from memory or something, because she logged into the machine, right?
Yeah, so from Web02, where Mary was logged in, we tapped into the memory and we extracted her hash, essentially. That's all we did. Yeah, but it requires local admin access, so you want to know your privilege escalation techniques, and you want to make sure that you do as much as possible with the lateral movement techniques and the users you get. You want to get to know them and see, okay, what can I do with this user here and there?
It's a great demonstration, because was it Michael, the original user, right, that RDP'd to a server, and then you used some kind of dodgy software to escalate your privileges to local admin, right? And then you ran Mimikatz to get the hashes, and now you've just used this hash to log into another server.
Yep. So just as a recap, we can go back to our documentation on the attack paths. We started with Michael. We RDP'd into Web02. If we were admin, we wanted to steal the credentials from Mary, which we just did, but we were not admin, right? So we had to escalate our... So we replaced that original MySQL file with our own malicious nasty file, right? We did get admin access, and we just dumped Mary's credentials from memory on Web02. And based on the users and groups here, Mary is a member of the local ADMFS. So with that, we have now accessed FileZone2 using a new lateral movement technique called WMI-exec. So far, our plan is going really well, right? All the theory we had here actually proves to be true.
Who's that dodgy guy that built this infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? I'm gonna have to find someone to blame.
Yeah.
We will just blame Jeff because he's a domain admin here, right? But now we are essentially coming up to this question mark, and we are now going to start exploring some territories we haven't seen before. And remember, I said my goal was to get domain admin in this pen test. And with admin access to the file server, I mean, we could do a whoami/priv groups here with Mary, right? This is a little bit scrambled now, but we can see here that we are a part of the built-in administrators group as Mary. So on a file server in a domain, you might find a lot of things. You might find home folders, which can contain God knows what, right? A lot of different things. You might find admin shares with script or old scripts that are not used anymore with hard-coded credentials and that kind of stuff. Only the imagination can really stop you here, right? But we need to loot the system. And at this point, I'm going to be really quick about this. We're not going to do any crazy escalations or anything here. We're going to have a look at the users folder and see something that should just not happen in an environment, right? We can see, first of all, the local admin has been logged in. That's fine. I'm going to forgive you as an administrator for logging into your server. That's fine. But this administrator.corp, this is the domain admin himself, like the built-in actual domain admin for the domain. Just don't do this, right? Never browse around on your domain admin. And to make things even worse, Jeff, which is also a domain admin, has been logged in here, right? And imagine what can happen if, for example, one of those log in and we are sitting here with admin access, Mimikatz ready, a domain admin logs into the box, we can dump their hash or ticket and just impersonate them somehow, right? In this case, we don't have any logged on sessions, but we're gonna enumerate Jeff a little bit here. So I'm going to go into his folder. And if we do, now we are in CMD. I'm going to do dir. And we have access to desktop. We have access to a lot of things, right? What I'm mostly interested in right now is to have a look at his PowerShell history. And that's usually stored in something called app data, which is a hidden folder. We don't necessarily see it here, but we can browse to it. Then roaming, if I remember correctly. Let's see. Roaming, Microsoft.
It's a spelling mistake, is it?
Yeah, that's a spelling mistake. Sorry about that. Roaming. I could copy and paste this as well, but I want to show that I can actually type on my keyboard as well, right? So Microsoft, Windows, PowerShell, PS readline. Yes, we actually have access to the console host history, which is Jeff's PowerShell history on this machine, right? Who knows what's there?
And that gets saved by default, right?
Yeah, this is the default folder. I mean, you can turn this off and everything, but this is a default setup. I haven't touched any of the default settings in Windows here. This is as default as it gets. So if Jeff logged into this machine, he did some fancy stuff in PowerShell, and this is default, we're going to figure out, right? So let's copy this, and we're simply just going to type it to the terminal. And obviously, this is a little bit fabricated for the demo, but we can see Jeff has been doing some really strange stuff here. It seems like he's doing some trusted host stuff with a domain controller. He's testing a WinRM configuration towards the DC, and it seems like he's trying to log in, right? We have a username here that Jeff typed in. Here we have a really strange variable, PWD. I don't know why he put that here, but we can see a password here, which says, I need OCP now, 1, 2, 3. And I would absolutely agree with Jeff in this setting. Like, Jeff, you need OCP. You need to get your stuff together, man. You shouldn't be working as a sysadmin if this is the case, right?
But I mean, so there's a credential stored in history, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this kind of stuff happens in the real world.
Oh, yeah. I've seen this happening so many times. And one of my favorite things to look at, if I see someone has been logged into a machine and I have admin access to the machine, I mean, the only reason we can see this is because we're a local admin, right? But then I really like to go through the PowerShell history because you can find so many cool things there from time to time, right? So obviously, this is speed up a little bit compared to what you will see in a normal pen test, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was the first folder I would check here, especially since I know Jeff is a domain admin. He's a prime target in this case.
So is that a password that he just typed, or is that a password that he used in a script or something?
Now, this is probably something he typed into this PWD variable. I don't know why he did it, because in this case, he could essentially do username equals Jeff, and he could do the enter PS session here. And this credential is going to pop up, type your password or username here, and that's going to be used in the session, right? So this is just a typo, I think.
Lazy.
Yeah, being lazy or just not, too careful about what you're doing. I would say that this is not the only or the worst mistake he did. The worst mistake he did here is to connect to this file server with his domain admin. You just should not do that. Domain admin should be really, really restricted in a domain environment. Now, we don't know if this password is going to work though. But obviously we're going to copy this, and I'm actually just going to add it. Let's add it to the documentation down here. Jeff domain admin, like this, and we just copy it there so we have it handy. It should be in my clipboard as well. Based on this, we could try to do some WinRM stuff, but I'm rather more interested in trying to connect to, for example, client 1 using the Jeff credential, right? So I'm going to start a new tab here, and I'm going to do a little bit of copy paste again. X-free RDP here, like this. So we're now going to try to log in with Jeff, the domain admin, with the password we found, to the corp.com domain. This is the IP address for client 1. And again, this is just me trying to make this look as good as possible, right? We hit enter, and let's see what happens. Jeff here. Welcome, Jeff. Let's see if we get something more. This might take a little bit of time because he may not have been logged into this machine, so it has to create a profile and all of that kind of stuff, right? Let's go ahead and try to start CMD as administrator right away. If we are domain admin, we should also be admin on a local machine, and it seems like we are. Let's zoom in. Who am I? We are Jeff. Who am I? Group. We are domain admin, right? So mission accomplished, essentially. And the attack vectors has been fairly straightforward here, but you can see this in the real world, and it's a lesson learned, especially for Jeff here.
My name is Jeff.
You shouldn't browse around with your domain admin. In fact, you shouldn't be a domain admin at all. In my organization, he wouldn't be. So on a normal pen test, if the goal is domain admin, this would essentially be enough. You would screenshot this and show, hey, we are logged in as domain admin. We have control over the domain now. And you wouldn't necessarily do anything more, right? Now we can move into a little bit more of a mindset of a malicious hacker, because a malicious hacker would probably not stop here, right? When you get domain admin, that's kind of where the fun begins. You can start doing bad stuff. I really don't recommend doing this. I work as a pen tester, but I know kind of how a malicious hacker would think about this. We're going to use this domain admin for something bad, right? So first of all, let's go to the C::tools folder. I have one of those on this machine as well. Let's start PowerShell and do ls. So on this machine, I have my hacking tools, including Mimikatz, PowerView, and PSExec, right? In this case, we're actually going to use PSExec to see if we can gain access to the domain controller. Now, this also requires a few prerequisites, but we are domain admin, so we should be pretty good. Let's see PSExec, and we just point to the DC01, and we want to try to start cmd.exe. Now, this is going to take a little while, so this is running. While this is running, I'll explain a little bit. For this to work, you need to be a part of the local admin group on DC. Domain admin might be that, right? The admin share must be available, but those are normally the default setting on a modern system today. Essentially what's happening here now is PSExec was trying to start the PSExec SVC exe service on the domain controller. This is going to create a service or spawn a service on a remote host, which in this case is the domain controller, right? And the CMD here is now a child process of the PSExec svc.exe, essentially. We also need port 445, and I believe it is UDP port 137 open to do this. If I do hostname, I'm not going to be able to clear my screen here and stuff because that doesn't really work too well with PSExec. But we do hostname. We are indeed logged into the domain controller. And who am I? We are Jeff. I want to move a little bit into the devastating attack that I talked about earlier. Right now, we have the keys to the kingdom. We are domain admin, and we should celebrate, right? This is cool. But what if we want to have some persistence here that is kind of flying a little bit under the radar? Let's say we want, in 5 years from now, log into this domain again as domain admin. We could try to add our own domain administrator here, but that is something that can be easily kind of detected, right? If I go ahead and add the user Mighty here now and add it to the domain admins, that's probably going to be detected eventually, and that's maybe not a good idea here. What I am going to move into now is something we call a golden ticket. And this is a persistence method we also show in a Pen 200 course, right? This is a really, really nasty attack. And if the sysadmin is not doing something about it, you will essentially have eternal access to the domain with the highest privilege possible. What we're going to do, we're going to forge a ticket or a TGT that we're not going to use the KDC or the Kerberos login or anything for this. We're actually going to fake this ourselves, right? This TGT is going to be it's going to appear to be signed by the domain's legitimate KDC itself. And we're going to encrypt the ticket with a KRB TGT password hash, right? Which is used when you create or when you log into a domain if you use the Kerberos, right? To create a golden ticket, we need the SID for the domain. That's the security identifier for the domain. And we're going to see why in a couple here. Obtaining the SID on a domain is very simple. We could have done that with a Michael user running whoami/groups, and we will actually see the SID for the domain. And more importantly, we need a KRB TGT password hash. There are two prerequisites for this to happen. We need access to the domain controller with either a local admin on the domain controller or a domain admin. We're gonna try to forge a ticket. We are on the domain controller. I'm gonna go to the C: drive here, or just the C drive. We're gonna create a folder called Pentest again, now on the domain controller. We're gonna move there. I'm gonna start PowerShell. I'm going to do ls. We have nothing there. The output might be a little bit scuffed from time to time here because of the use of PSExec. So this is just kind of what you will have to become familiar with when you work as a hacker, essentially. So first of all, we're going to download Mimikatz because we want to dump this password hash now for the KRBTGT account, right? It's pretty similar to what we did earlier. So let's do invoke web request, URI, HTTP, and the IP for Kali, Mimikatz.exe. Hopefully my server is still running. We're going to write this to Mimikatz.exe on the domain controller. The output, again, is a little bit messed up here. But if we do dir now or ls, we have Mimikatz on the domain controller. So we don't need to spend a whole lot of time explaining exactly what's going on here. I just want to show the nastiness here. So I'm going to start mimikatz.exe. And we have the same prompt as before. Again, we're going to enable the debug privilege. And we get a 200 OK because we are admin, right? We are a domain admin here. Now, to dump the hashes, we're actually going to interact with this LSA process again. So we're going to do LSA dump this time around, and we just want to dump the entire LSA. We're going to do patch. So LSA dump LSA is essentially going to allow us to dump the credentials stored in the LSA, essentially, right? Since we are on the domain controller, we're actually going to be able to find every single user hash stored on the domain controller, including the KRBTGT account, which is the one we really need now, right? The patch here is simply just, I think back in the days, I didn't always need this, but this is essentially going to inject a DLL into the LSAS process, and it's somewhat complex what's going on in the back there, but it's going to hook and modify certain functions, and it's going to allow Mimikatz to read the hashes without triggering errors or access restrictions and that kind of stuff. So let's just try to run this and see what happens, right? Now, the output is not as crazy as earlier because we don't have a lot of information here. But here, for example, we have the hash for the client 02, client 01. Those are the machine accounts in the domain. If you go a little bit further up here, we have the hash for Jeff. That's interesting. We don't necessarily need this password. We can probably do past the hash. We have the hash for the Emma user, which we haven't really interacted with in this pentest, right? But Emma is a user in the domain here. We have Mary, we have Michael. You might recognize this one. This is the same hash we dumped from Web2 earlier, right? Going a little bit further up, this is where the interesting thing happens. So first of all, we have the SID for the domain. This is needed for the golden ticket. I'm going to explain why in a few. I'm just going to document this and add it to the documentation. So domain SID. And we're going to get the KRBTGT hash. We're going to paste that down here. So let's go back to the domain controller. This was not the domain controller, I think. Where is the domain controller? Here we go. So we have the SID, we have the administrator itself, the built-in administrator account. We can get that hash as well. But more importantly, we are interested in KRBTGT account, which is used to sign Kerberos tickets. So we have every single NTLM hash from the domain here. We're going to copy the KRBTGT and put it to our documentation. And that's it. We don't need anything more. We don't need to do more fancy stuff on the domain controller. So I'm going to go ahead and exit Mimikatz here. I'm actually just going to do this. And we are logged in on where are we logged in now? Let's see. I don't even remember. So many machines we have compromised. Hostname. Okay, so we are logged in on client 01 as the Jeff domain admin. Just to prove how nasty this attack is, I'm going to log out of Jeff admin, and I'm going to log back into the client 01 here with the user Michael, which is, if you remember correctly, is a low privilege user in the domain. The only thing he can do is to RDP to Web02, right? We hit enter. And obviously, we are able to log in. This is the first user we used earlier. And we are now logged in to client 01. Let's again start CMD. We don't need any admin permissions now, so we're just going to start this as a regular user. Let's go into the C::tools folder where we have Mimikatz stored. I'm going to start Mimikatz now with no admin privileges. We don't even need to do any privilege debug or anything. What we can do is to purge all the tickets we have, because we probably have some Kerberos tickets here now since we logged in. We don't necessarily need to do that, but let's do that just to be sure. Kerberos purge. So now we have 0 tickets, and we're going to finally create our own golden ticket, right? So let's clear the screen. We're going to use Kerberos here, and we're going to use the gold module. For this, we need a legit user in the domain, which is, well, not Mighty. Well, we could add Mighty as well, but Michael. We don't need a password. The reason historically, we didn't even need a valid user to do this. But since I think it's July 2022, there was a patch that requires you to have a valid user to be able to craft this ticket, right? But since we don't need a password, and you have seen how easy it is to enumerate users in the domain. So, and the domain here, domaincorp.com, we need to make sure that we are doing this correctly. Otherwise, the ticket we generate is going to be invalid, right? So the SID for the domain The security identifier for this domain is the one we found there. Let's paste it. Now we're going to do the KRBTGT, the hash, which is going to be used to sign this ticket and make it appear valid. Now we have an option. We can, this is all you need for the ticket, by the way, right? We have the SID, which is easily obtainable. We have the KRBTGT, which is a little bit more tricky because you need access to the domain controller to do it, right? Now we can use, for example, /PTT to pass this ticket as is into our current session. This is what we're doing in the course, if I remember correctly. But we can also create a file with the ticket that we can store and have on our USB stick or whatever for a long time. I don't recommend doing this if you're a pen tester. Just don't. It's no reason to do this. But I'm going to point this to a ticket called Corp. Let's call it Corp Golden. So this is going to generate a file in the tools folder called Corp Golden. Let's see if this works. Missing user argument. I have a typo here. Let's just do this again, like user, not a U anymore, with one U as well. There. So user, Michael. Let's try. And we can see that final ticket saved to file. This would probably work even if we have some typos and stuff here. So we need to make sure that everything is correct. We have the user Michael. Domain is corp.com or .com. No typos there. We have the SID for the domain. User ID 500. I guess many of the viewers have seen this before, but this 500 is actually for the built-in administrator in the domain. So we are kind of, hey, I'm the admin. We have a bunch of groups as well. Those are all high privileged. We could choose which group this ticket should appear to be a member of, for example, right? If we want the ticket to be a member of the 502 group, for example, we would say /group 502. And the SID here is used to identify the domain, while the group ID here is a relative ID, which identifies the group, right? So I believe 502 is the domain admin, and 519, I wonder if it's the enterprise admin, right? So this is the reason why we need the SID as well. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to identify, okay, what domain is this belonging to, right? The service key, this is where it's being assigned. Typically, this is done by the KDC, but we are just doing this ourselves now by faking the ticket. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So we created this ticket now on the 27th of April, 2023, right? You see the 2023 here, David?
Yeah.
Do you see anything interesting in the expiry date here?
Yeah, it's like a decade, eh?
Yeah, it's going to expire in year 2033. And I think, well, actually, it's not completely 10 years. It's 3 days off. I think this might be due to leap years, which I think is every fourth year or something. They have 366 days instead of 365, right? But essentially, by default, this ticket is valid for 10 years. And that's pretty sick, especially you're going to see what I'm going to do with this ticket. Eventually, it's going to make it a little bit more crazy. Before we do that, however, I'm actually going to create an even more crazy ticket because I did some funny experimentation earlier. In Mimikatz, we can do /endin, right? In here, we need to specify the minutes, or we can specify the minutes we want the user or the ticket to be available. And I was doing some research on the 32-bit integers and that kind of stuff. How big of a value can you actually put here? And will the ticket actually be available for that amount of time? And I found this 2 billion something value to be the maximum amount. Now, let's call this ticket Corp Super Golden, right? And let's see at the expiry date. We're going to end up with 2 tickets now. The expiry date, well, we created it today, 24th of April, right? You're
going to live for a long time, eh?
Yeah, so essentially, if the sysadmin is not doing anything, to combat this golden ticket, we will essentially have access to this domain for 4,096 years or something like that. So this is just kind of a funny thing, right? But it shows that it's possible. And obviously, if you have to do a golden ticket in a penetration test, maybe you need to prove, a concept or something. Set it to expire like 10 minutes, 20 minutes or something like that. You really, if your laptop gets stolen and someone gets hold of this Corp Super Golden ticket now, it's just so game over for this domain, right? And I'm going to show why now. I'm actually going to exit out of Mimikatz. I'm going to exit CMD as well and start it over again, just to prove what's going on here. We're going to go to C:: tools again. We can start PowerShell and do ls.
So this is just a basic user once again, right?
Yeah, we are Michael now. We have not injected any tickets, right? So if I do, who are my groups here? We are just Michael. part of the RDP web. So who are my groups? We can see that we are just member of the users, nothing special going on here. So LS, we have the corp golden, but before injecting this ticket, this is to prove that this works. I'm going to try to psexec now into the domain controller as Michael, as our current user, without the ticket injected. And we can see that we immediately get an access is denied here. So we are not able to RDP, well, no, psexec rather, into the domain controller. And we don't have any domain privileges, right? Well, not administrative ones anyway. So as Michael, we're going to start Mimikatz again. Actually, let's just do a LS here, corp goal. I want to copy this because this is the ticket we're going to use. We could use both here, but we're going to start Mimikatz. And this, just keep in mind that this can be done without any admin privileges. And injecting this ticket could actually be done on a computer that is not even a part of the domain. And that's really scary. You could literally take your laptop, hook up to the network. I mean, you need to be able to communicate with the DC somehow. But let's say you have some misconfigured network. You have a guest network or something. You tap into that, try to ping the DC or communicate with it, and you might be able to get traffic, right? I've seen that as well. So if you have access to the KRB then we can craft our ticket. The only thing we actually need to do here is to do Kerberos, PTT, because this is a pass the ticket attack. This is not NTLM hashes anymore. And I'm just going to feed it with a corp golden ticket that is in my working tools directory, right? We hit enter. We can see that the file corp golden is okay. It's now injected to our process. In Mimikatz now, we can't just start CMD now because that's not going to work, because in that process, we're not going to have the ticket injected, right? So I'm going to do misc and just start cmd.exe from the current process instead where the ticket is injected. That did not work. We're just going to do, let me clear the screen here. Misc, it's just CMD, right? This. So we're going to start CMD from Mimikatz, hit enter. Patch OK, it says on the top there. Let's zoom in. Who are we? We are Michael. Is there anything special going on here? Who are my groups? Nothing new here, really. Let me zoom in and do this again. So who are we? Michael. Who are my groups? Nothing special, right? We are just a normal user. The only group you are a member of here in the domain is RDP web. However, with this ticket injected to memory, let's try to do psexec dc01 cmd.exe. I can zoom in hopefully a little bit here now, right? So we're doing this as Michael, but we're going to use our injected fake ticket, and we're going to present that to the KDC, which is the key distribution center. We're going to try to get the service ticket and all that, what I talked about earlier. If we can trick the KDC into believing that our TGT here is valid, we should be able to psexec into the controller or domain controller. So let's see, right? This takes a little bit of time. At least we're not getting access denied right away, right? So we'll just wait for the service to start. Hopefully on the domain controller, should be any moment now, and we will have a shell. Okay, there we go. Who am I? We are Michael. Now, who are my groups? I need to zoom out a little bit here to make this clear. This is rather interesting. Let's see if we can get this. Who are my groups? Let's see. So we just ran who are my groups here on the domain controller with our golden ticket injected, and we are now built-in administrators. We have a lot of other things as well, but we are also domain admin on Michael. We are a group policy creator owner. We are schema admins here, enterprise admins, and this denied RODC password replication group, right? High mandatory level. We have access to everything as the user Michael. So Michael is still not really a part of the domain admins group, right? If we check Active Directory now and go into the domain admins, we're not going to see Michael there, but we have been granted this access by the KDC because we fooled it with a valid TGT signed by the very Kerberos or KRB TGT account in the domain. So we're just fooling the entire system, essentially.
He could do anything he wanted now, right?
Yes. So to demonstrate this, let's have a look at we are at the domain controller hostname, right? So if I do net user on a domain controller, we can see the users in Active Directory as well. They are not local users, but those are the users for the domain. We can see Michael, Jeff, KRB, TGT, Mary, guest, and so on. And the command completed with one or more errors. We don't really care about that. So are we really domain admin? We can try to find out, right? Let's run the same we did with the escalation we did earlier. Net user, mighty. Let's do a more complex password. We can at least do a password 123 with a big P now, right? 1, 2, 3, exclamation mark, well, 1, 2, 3, like this. And we do the /add. This is only going to add the user mighty to the server running or serving Active Directory. We don't really want that. We want to add him to the domain, right? Net user mighty, password 1, 2, 3, add domain. The command completed successfully. So we now, if we do net user, we have mighty user here. If I do net user mighty, I might try to add the domain flag here to see if it's better. Yeah. So net user mighty domain, we can see that we are now a domain user, but we are just a part of the domain users. That's kind of boring, right? If I do net group, domain admins, mighty, add domain as our fake user here using our golden ticket. Okay, that was not found. I have a typo here. Let's do that again, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do net group, domain admins. We need to remember the S there. We're going to try to add mighty because we are now a user in the domain. Add /domain. And this is never ever going to work if you're not a domain admin, right? The command completed successfully. If I do net user mighty /domain here, we are a part of the domain admins. And that's pretty cool, I have to say. And we can now, for example, let's disconnect from the domain controller as well and just exit everything. We can log out from client 1 and we can try to log in with a new user. Here, mighty, password 1, 2, 3. In this case, we log into the corp.com domain. This is going a little bit quick now, but it's just so game over for this domain. So, I mean, we can play around for ages here. You can see it takes a little bit of time because it needs to create the profile here in Windows. But we have a welcome, and hopefully we will see a desktop pretty soon as well. So with this, we also, I mean, obviously with domain admin, we escalate our privileges on clients and everything, right? You can go ahead now, start CMD. We don't even need to start it as admin because we are essentially domain admin here. Net user, mighty /domain, part of the domain admins. And now I can do everything I want with a domain or with a mighty user, right? But I didn't necessarily need to add mighty here because I have Michael. I have a ticket that is valid for 4,000 years, right? But this was just to kind of show the power and that it was not all just fake, right? It was an actual domain admin we had.
That's fantastic, Remi. That's great. I mean, thanks so much for the demo. You know, it's one thing to read this. It's one thing to just talk about it, but it's great to see the demo. So I really appreciate you putting the demo together because I know these demos can be really hard to do.
Yeah, this one was a lot of talking, so my voice is going to be probably bad for.
Great demo, great demo. So just to summarize, we started with a user where we had credentials, but it was just a very basic user, and we ended with you having total control of the domain.
Yeah. So if you want to, go further on our attack path there, Jeff PS creds, for example, log in as domain admin, take over DC, and then golden ticket, for example, golden ticket, eternal power. That's basically it, right? I mean, of course, there are ways to invalidate a golden ticket as well, and this is actually something I wanted to mention. So I have been on a lot of penetration tests, and one of the things I really check is, okay, how long ago is it that the KRBTGT password was changed, right? And I've seen this up to 12, 15 years.
Wow.
Like the account is from when the domain was created. And yes, of course, you might have upgraded from Windows 2000 to 2008 to 2012, 2022, and so on. But the KRBTGT password hash remains the same unless you actually, reset the password, right? The only way to actually really invalidate a ticket like this is to reset the KRBTGT password as twice. You need to do it twice. One is not enough. And it's really difficult to just get away from this. You're best off if you just don't let an attacker get so far so it can get control over your domain controller, right? That's really the best thing to do. Follow best practices, use strong password policies, patch your software. Just don't let attackers in the first place. Easier said than done. But,
very easy to say that, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And just for the sysadmins out there, I don't recommend you to just rush to your computer and reset this password now. You want to do some research on how to actually do that first. There are some best practices for it. But for Kerberos or the KRBTGT password, there is a backwards compatibility, right? Because if you reset the password on the KRBTGT account and that hash immediately gets changed, then the existing tickets in your domain is going to be invalidated. They're not going to work anymore. People won't be able to do this and that. Services might fail, etc. But there is a backup for that. So the previous NTLM hash that you used is still going to be stored and used as this kind of backup, right? But if you reset it twice, then it's kind of, okay, your domain might not be functioning too well. So you want to plan this out a little bit, and I believe Microsoft has a script for this that you should probably follow to invalidate it. And I strongly recommend having the KRB TGT account involved in a password routine where you change it every so often, right?
I mean, I think the point about all of this is it's that whole thing. Why do we do this? To show vulnerabilities and then to come up with best practices.
Yeah. I mean, not all pen testers necessarily know how to patch everything and that kind of stuff, right? But we come with at least recommendations, and this is for this domain. This is the best recommendation I can give. Reset that password. I would just reset it twice right away, because in the meantime, if you reset once, the attacker can still go ahead and refresh their golden ticket, right? And this is one of the reasons. I mean, in newspapers here in Scandinavia, at least, I often read about attacks, and we often see that, okay, the attackers has been in our system for so long, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have control and that kind of stuff. And there might be several reasons for that. I mean, they might have a very persistent vulnerability that they are exploiting over and over and over again. Like, it's just an open door. You can come and go as you'd like. But if you at some point get access to this account, as I mentioned, you don't even need to be logged into the domain. You just need to be able to communicate with the DC, and you have domain admin, or in fact, you have the privileges you want in the domain. You can decide yourself, right? It's scary. And again, as a pen tester, I don't recommend doing this, but malicious people are doing it.
But I mean, thanks so much again for showing the demo. And for everyone who's watching, put in the comments below, did you enjoy this? Hopefully we can get Remi and others from the OffSec team back to show more stuff like this, because it's fantastic to see these demos, I think. But please put in the comments below. Remi just wanted to say thanks once again. Thanks for spending so much time building this and demonstrating it.
No problem. I enjoyed it. I like creating demos and share the knowledge out there. So that's perfect.